table.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special council meeting for January 12th, 2017. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. I'd like to call the special meeting to order and recognize the wrong traditional territory of the Nemo First Nations. So, introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry, you not? No? Okay. We have a motion for the adoption of the agenda, please. Councillor Hong, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, first and only item of business is community services, safe consumption and overdose prevention services. And who's leading this?
In the name of staff, I asked for some information sheets yesterday. Just nothing got prepared in time. I'm willing to say something, Your Worship. With the current crisis declared December 9th, I believe, by the ministerial order, and the fact that the council has heard since about April 2015 of the fentanyl crisis, and with the pending current fentanyl crisis, that is probably going to be even worse when the stuff arrives in the street. As we've heard from the medical health officer and things, the grain of salt-sized cork fentanyl can kill a lot of people. It's unbelievable power. So with that, as people are aware of, there's an overdose prevention working group. There's a non-sanctioned safe injection or collaborative injection site. I don't know how we want to word it. It's never had a wording before. We know that the numbers in the Nanaimo represent some 40 to 50% increase over the average of the last 3 years. This year's estimated to be 28 fatalities, 26 to 28. And the previous years was 16 to 20. So it's quite an increase, and we know that. So therefore, to move this forward and to help authorize the site in the Nanaimo under the guise of the service that should be delivering it, the Nanaimo Health Authority. And I must say I appreciate the fact that the Health Authority in the meetings with City Council and staff over the last weeks moving this forward. It's hugely important. The site itself is up there. The unsupervised one has actually had a call in the other day. The health person and the ambulance and the fire department was one first to arrive on scene. And I think the person would have been alone somewhere, either in the room or in an alley. So I believe I'm quite happy that happened. Therefore, I would move the following 4 motions with one addition to this person that's in front of you. That the council, I imagine through some special order, because there are changes of rules, authorize the use of 437 Wesley Street for the provision of temporary overdose prevention services. Secondly, recognize the jurisdiction of the province regarding the use of city property for the purposes of delivering overdose prevention services that may not comply with the applicable city zoning and regular bylaws. This is based on the Public Health Emergency Declaration under the Public Health Act, April 14, 2016, and the Ministerial Order number M488, December 9th, 2016. Further, direct staff to amend the lease agreements, that's CA 200265, between the City of Nanaimo and the province, that'd be specifically BC Housing, I believe, and approve the necessary amendments to the operating agreement in order to permit the use of the subject property for purposes of delivering overdose prevention services by Island Health through the existing operator, Canadian Mental Health Association. And fourth, and this is where I obviously have a change to the language in here that's been circulated, direct staff to assist Island Health in the public engagement process and communication associated with the establishment of temporary and permanent overdose prevention services in Nanaimo. So I've added between the word temporary and overdose a comma for permanent. So we also work on both temporary and permanent. And if I may talk to the issue again, in collaboration with the RCMC, city staff, Island Health, Dr. Hasselbach and his people from the Island Health group that are involved with this, this is a working solution that will solve a lot of the concerns with unregulated, regulated, and those types of issues. And I'm really happy that we're where we're at today at this meeting, and I much appreciate it. So, therefore, thank you very much.
Councillor Yocum.
Thank you. Regards to Jimmy on number 4, direct staff to assist Island Health in the public engagement. When it gets to the temporary site, if it gets to this 434 or 437 Wesley Street, I'm in the same position. Well, I'm going to support. Obviously, this is great work by everybody. But the sooner it's in Island Health's hands, which I believe it should be yesterday, won't we sort of be disengaging back? Won't the public process be their endeavor or their process? And secondly, the permanent location, because I get this is temporary, be their part of that process, their responsibility?
Well, can I address that? Typically in the city, when we've done these endeavors, we are part of the Good Neighbor Agreement.
Okay.
And facilitating the Good Neighbor Agreement. And currently we have a couple in the area with the Wesley Street and the Harris House. And they are typically, you bring those people in and the city will work to ensure that, Island Health's mandate for publicity might be a little different than ours. And so meshing those together, and Island Health even talked as much as yesterday as putting joint messaging together. And so this will help, I believe, and will help our community move into these type of issues.
So just a follow-up I make is absolutely believe in good neighborly relationships and that stuff, but again, it comes down to resources and dollars. I just don't want to go too far where we're getting too much of their jurisdiction of resources, and I'm a little cynical about provincial bureaucratic systems because they offload quite often. That's what I fear. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I ask Councillor Ford to speak, I just want a clarification on the direct staff to assist Island Health in the public engagement process. Can we consider adding the word required? Because there may well be a difference in interpretation of a public consultation process and a public consultation process that the province may or may not require. That's the first one. And the second one is when you use the word establishment of the temporary and permanent overdose prevention services, is it possible to consider to the establishment of the temporary overdose prevention services and or subsequent supervised injection services? Because there's two names that are being used, right? And in the government circles.
Your Worship? Yes, thank you. On Monday, you passed resolutions number 1 and number 2, and both of those were very clear about doing both the short term and the long term, and we use the correct terminology in that. So this is a duplication, and so I would suggest that the proposed amendment is likely is unnecessary.
So the language that we see here today is mirrors what we passed on Monday.
Well, you already passed 2 motions that commit us to engaging with them on the federal process for the supervised injection site, as well as the ministerial order 1 for the overdose prevention site. We had precision there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fuller.
I'm glad we're here today. This is quick. This is moving. This is the way it should have been a long time ago. And it should have been done a long time ago. We had a great meeting yesterday. And, I don't think I swore once, which is good for me. So there was something I was going to say, but I totally forgot what it is. But this is good. And we need to assist Island Health, and a very good point in recognizing that the difference between public engagement, because one's idea of public engagement might be sending a flyer out to the neighborhood, and the others might be inviting the neighborhood to come in, give us some feedback. So great suggestion. So the sooner we get this passed, the sooner we get going on it, the better for everybody. And the sooner that the on-site overdose protection facility at City Hall's parking lot is gone. So good for everybody and good for the consumers. And yes, we are enabling them to make better decisions in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe and Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm really pleased with the cooperation that's been shown between the city and VHA, especially in the last couple of days to get us quickly to this point, and I can certainly support these motions. I'm in recognition of the crisis that we have, not just in our city, but in other places as well. And I'm really pleased that we're moving expeditiously to create an authorized and professionally staffed temporary facility. I have two questions. I'm not sure if somebody at this table or our staff or maybe Dr. Hasselbeck could answer. One is when we talk about the longer-term permanent facility, would the intent be to look elsewhere from Wesley Street, or do we know that yet? And secondly, what would be an estimated timeline for establishing, having the temporary site up and running?
So I think it's appropriately referred to Dr. Hasselbeck as they have the lead on that.
Thank you.
Welcome to your.
If I may, Your Worship and Council, I think the
Just wish, yeah. Come on up here if you would, please.
That way you get the camera's facing it.
Only because it will record better.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Thank you for having us again and moving this forward as quickly as things seem to be moving right now. It's very much appreciated. I think two questions are in terms of does the use of 437 Wesley preclude that, or would we be looking for another permanent site? I think that it would form a temporary location. It would not either preclude it or make it more likely to be chosen as a long-term location, and that site needs to be considered in the context of other sites for as a formal application is developed. Okay, so moving there would not in any way enhance or make it more likely or less likely.
Okay, thank you.
On the second question, how quickly, and again in our conversations, I would like to challenge the city and ourselves to see if we can get an application together by the end of April. That would be a real push. Certainly, I hope that we can do it by the end of June. That is I think, really a challenge given what we've learned about how this, the Victoria applications were 600 pages, 5 volumes. It's a lot of work, but we do have that information available to us. The slowest portion of the application for a permanent site process at the moment actually seems to be the assessment of those applications by Health Canada, over which we have no control, and we do not know what that turnaround time is. They are working on improving that, but we've certainly seen delays of a year in some communities. I think by the time we get our application in, unfortunately, we're going to be much later than most other communities, but I have a feeling they'll have improved their process.
Okay, if I may, Your Worship. Thanks, Dr. Hasselbeck. So I think you're referring in your answer just now to the permanent facility, and my question was related to timeline for the temporary setup, Wesley Street.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually was referring to the permanent. In terms of making the site at 437 Wesley, that can be done very quickly. We're still probably looking towards the end of January, and I put that out there because the major slow point at this point in time is actually hiring, and that would be irrespective of whether Council chose to go forward with this recommendation on the Wesley site or whether we continue to use the proposal for Wentworth. So we're talking roughly the same time frame. We're actually in better position if we were to go to Wesley at this point. It might be a little bit sooner.
Okay, I appreciate the information. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hong.
Thank you. I fully support this, and I just wanted the public to know that this is temporary. We're not sidestepping. We're not trying to swindle the public and not providing consultation. This is an important matter. We have to deal with it now, or it's going to get worse. So I just wanted to ensure that the public knows that we're not ignoring public process. And the reason we're doing this is because it's really important. It's detrimental that we do it now instead of waiting and go through the processes of consultation and everything else that we have to do. So I just wanted to be aware that we didn't forget about that. We didn't do this on purpose, but we are engaged with our community and we want to make the community a better place. So I will fully support these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Bestwick, Ms. Sammer, and then Councillor Fuller.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody. And important topic. Glad we're here. Just on number 4, and not to try to rewrite anything, but just my thoughts are to make it perhaps even cleaner if it even is required. But if I could just do direct staff to proceed with Island Health in a joint public engagement process, which includes but is not limited to communication releases, public neighborhood meetings with regard to the establishment of a temporary overdose prevention service and the establishment of a permanent overdose prevention service. And only because I'm hearing other people around the table suggest that we need to make sure that we get the permanent in there, and we need to make sure that we engage the public, and we need to make sure that our communications are consistent and joint and together. So I'm in favor of all 4. If there's redundancy here and some of them we've already approved, great, we can approve them twice. That's my only comment. Whatever we do, I'm voting in favor of whatever's in front of us.
Could you give a bit of a reread? I like the sound of
Well, I just really wrote really quickly. Direct staff to proceed with Island Health in a joint public engagement process, which includes but is not limited to communication releases, public or neighborhood meetings with regard to the establishment of a temporary overdose prevention service and the establishment of a permanent overdose prevention service. It's trying to capture the comments that people have made about, is it temporary, is it permanent, is it both? We've had some concerns most recently about communications and releases and who released what and all that sort of stuff. So if we're going to work together and in the greater good harmoniously, then let's maybe ensure that we have it in writing that that's what we're going to do.
Sammer?
Thank you, Mayor McKay. So I just wanted to, for the public's benefit, because we had this discussion in our VIHA council meeting yesterday, we were advised by VIHA, and Dr. Hasselbeck can probably speak to it as well, but we were advised that the ministerial order doesn't trigger our zoning amendment and trigger any city obligations to have to go out and consult. I think that's an important point to put forward. The permanent solution likely will, depending on where it's located, but at this point we're able to rely on the urgency and the crises with the ministerial order and that provincial jurisdiction.
Thank you. Councillor Fuller?
Well, I've got that in my brain pan right now. Well, it doesn't apply just to go and consult and partner with Island Health to consult on the temporary. I think we are obligated to help them. We're not required to, but I think we're obligated to help them. That communication with the public. With regards to the amendment to the motion, I just want to see one thing added to that, because the way it read, it implies we're going to be discussing both at once. So if you add in the future after the permanent location and the permanent location in the future, because otherwise it could imply we're trying to slam them both at the community at the same time. So that just separates the permanent one, but it still says we're going to have those conversations jointly. With regards to Health Canada, I'll hold off on that one. part of the communication, and I was reading some stuff earlier today with regards to the neighborhoods, there's a huge amount of issues with, say, Nob Hill Park, and people that are utilizing in that park, and needles being found all over the place in the city. And part of the communication is that something like this will reduce the numbers of those. And what we found with what is happening over on the City Hall site is Paris House has these small black boxes that users can put their used needles in. And they're bringing those back to us full. They're not leaving their needles outside anymore. These are the ones that we're able to talk to that are coming in and saying, look, here, take this with you. If you happen to use outdoors without us, please bring the used ones back. So that's the education part. With regards to Health Canada and the walls being put up and having to be broken down by Health Canada, want us to go and set something up in Ottawa? At Health Canada's property? Maybe it'll speed the process up a bit. I'm just joking, it's nothing to joke about, but sometimes that is what is needed in order to speed the processes up. Yeah. So if we could add that somehow in the future, get to the more permanent site, that separates it as a conversation, but it says we are going to be involved in the conversation.
I don't have any other speakers. So as it stands right now, we're still with the original. Councillor Kemp.
I find actually that, like what Councillor Bestwick said, where it actually declares that we are going to do a public relations and we are going to hold meetings. And I also appreciate what Councillor Flo said, not to muddy the water, why I just didn't want to miss permanent when I first changed that. And I think this language to proceed with also works to what you had said earlier, Mr. Mayor, about instead of associated, the required stuff. So I think this makes more to the required. So I would suggest it's a friendly amendment to include the comments to proceed with public relations and the meetings as staff has it written there. So I find that, and I guess the seconder would have to agree that it's friendly for me.
Okay, so can we have a review of the amended motion proposed? Remember, please.
We have it right. So if actually it was a little bit faster getting it the second time, and I tried my best, but if Councillor Bestwick would be agreeable to reading what he put in, and we can add in the future date, and I think that's number 4, and the rest would be 1, 2, and 3. And I can read out 1, 2, and 3, and if Councillor Bestwick would read out 4. So that Council 1 authorize the use of 437 Leslie Street for the provision of temporary overdose prevention services. 2, recognize the jurisdiction of the province regarding the use of the subject property for purposes of delivering overdose prevention services that may not comply with applicable city zoning and regulatory bylaws. This based on the Public Health Emergency Declaration under the Public Health Act, April 14th, 2016, and the Ministerial Order number M488, December 9th, 2016. 3, direct staff to amend the lease agreement to CA 200265 between the City of Nanaimo and the province and approve the necessary amendments to the operating agreement in order to permit the use of the subject property for purposes of delivering overdose prevention services by Island Health through the existing operator, Canadian Mental Health Association. And 4 would be
to direct staff to proceed with Island Health in a joint public engagement process, which includes, but is not limited to, communication releases, public and/or neighborhood meetings with regard to the establishment of a temporary overdose prevention service and the subsequent establishment of a permanent overdose prevention service.
That covers it. Councillor Brennan.
I would just like to ask Island Health, Dr. Hasselbeck, if the terminology joint process is works for them. Are there any implications of joint that are different than working together?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I'm going to also introduce Norma Winsper, who is our local person who's leading this. If I was going to put on a bureaucratic hat at the moment, I have no difficulty with the permanent joint approach. I'm not as sure what that short-term public engagement, public communications together, I think we've committed to. Whether it's an emotion or not, we're committed to that. In terms of what does that look like about public meetings, you may be providing too much direction at this point. So if you're going to ask my preference, I would prefer, I don't have a problem saying joint, but not necessarily including what exactly does that public engagement process look like. It's probably too restrictive, given that we are in a state of emergency.
So what does that mean for the language then?
I wonder if I could ask another question before you finish up. Dr. Hasselbeck, do you believe that this language, because the way I'm reading this, and I at this point I can't support it, only because Island Health are under a ministerial order to do something. Our involvement at this point is simply by the fact that we are going to grant permission for the tenant that's leasing the property to allow you to use it for that purpose on our property. Yes, we do have an involvement, but I'm concerned that the language, only because of the language, will fetter your ability to get this done as quickly as necessary under the order that you're under.
A council motion can't direct, there's no jurisdiction of a council motion to apply to Vancouver Island Health, so their jurisdiction of the ministerial order is retained.
Trumps us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I was going to thank both of you because you said that far more eloquently than I could have. I was trying to hint.
Thank you. You fine, Councillor Brennan?
Yep.
Okay, Councillor Tipp.
Well, yeah, I totally appreciate your point there. The interesting is, I think we want to make sure our public is informed, and we're kind of double proceeding, having an overlap on it, I think is better than pushing it to the one organization. They have their methodology, but our staffs will work together to try and get good messaging to the public. And I appreciate the fact that we don't want to override anything, but we also want to make sure our public know what we're doing. Because we've had pros and cons to the process that's going on.
Thank you. Requirement for anything on number 4 there with respect to seconder, it's been moved and seconded.
Yeah, and it's been a friendly amendment with agreement from the mover and the secondary. You are free to vote now.
Thank you. So, does council want to take them all together or Sarah? All together? Okay. I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. No other notice of motion, other business?
Do we need to rise and support Frank, or will be open?
Question period. Is there anyone wishing to ask any questions? Seeing none, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Bestwick, seconded by Councilor Hong.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.